767 is the song.
$7.67. If you didn't hear that back there, that'll be our song here in just a moment. So we talked tonight about decisions, really indecision. I was thinking about one of the toughest questions we have around the house. We've been married almost be 30 years in May. Is what do you want for supper? That's a real tough one. And I guess that's good that that's one of the toughest challenges that we face, because I know a lot of people have a lot harder decisions to make. And I think it's pretty typical, especially in 2026, to have these to have indecision in your life. I know you go to Walmart and you go in for jelly, and there's 900 types of jelly, and there's so many decisions everywhere that you can make. When you buy a TV, you get stuck, you don't want buyer's remorse. You want to get your money's worth, but there's, a wall of TVs and stuff to look at. So those are the minor decisions we have to make. Of course, there's big decisions that we have to make. When you're dating somebody, is that a person that you might see yourself marrying when you get married? Or you get a little bit older, should you buy this house? Should you buy this certain car? There's a lot of important decisions that have to be made. But the biggest thing is indecision when it comes to our faith. And if it's something that we realize we're doing, we need to fix it. When we're sort of going back and forth a little bit and not really sure of what we should do, and whether we should follow what our faith tells us to do, or sort of make our own decision, think that we're the most wise, and decide on the basis of that. I think that when we lean into our faith, when we use our faith, when we make our decisions, even our small decisions, I know we talk about it sometimes when we lead the prayer here, that we want to look to the Bible. We want to look to what we've learned here when we make even the smallest decision, because those decisions pile up. And I think all of our decision making becomes easier when we view our choices through those lenses, through the idea of what is expected of us. How do I get to heaven at the end of this life? Even tiny decisions can throw us off track. It can lead to other bigger bad decisions as we go through life. So we need to be very careful to try to do what's right with every little thing that comes up, because we don't know where these things might lead. James 1 tells us, starting in verse 2, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." We have to have patience when we're thinking about the decisions in our lives. We have to not make a hasty decision. We're just run into something, not thinking. We need to think about the impact it's not just going to have on our lives, but the people we care about, people around us. I've told the story before, years and years ago. I guess I'd been at the other company just 6 or 7 years when my boss said, "Hey, Kansas City, come move to Kansas City, manage Kansas City for us." And I was like, "No, I'm staying right here. We're not moving. Family's here. We're not moving." They offered me to go to Orlando, and I was like, "No, not going to go to Orlando. Not going to do that. We're going to stay right here. We're going to do that." And yeah, it was more money. The opportunity was for more money, but look what you end up doing. You move away from your family, and that, to me, it was a priority to stay here. And I thought it'd be what would be best for the kids was to stay here too. And lucky that it all just turned out okay. That it all worked out. But you need to think about those big picture things when you make decisions like that. Going on in James 1, it says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind." For let not that man suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. He is double-minded, unstable in all his ways. I think sometimes people ask for things that they're not things we should be asking for. Sometimes we wish for these worldly rewards, and we'll get our worldly rewards if we're not careful, if that's where our mind is set. And that's all we'll get if we're not careful. We need to think about that too. Proverbs 3, starting in verse 5, says, in the sight of God and man, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. And of course, it sounds like that would be a simple, easy thing to do, but we have got a lot working against us in this life. A lot of distractions, a lot of people telling us do this, do that. A lot of, we'd want to look a certain way to the people that we know. We want to look successful, whatever our definition of success is. And that leads people to make a lot of, I think, world-based decisions. And then there's just some people that just roll the dice and choose completely against their faith. They choose against what they know they should do. And we talked not too long ago about Lot's wife and what happened to her, even though she clearly knew what to do and what not to do. And it just took a split-second decision to look back, and that's that. We need to be listening. We need to be listening to what the Lord wants us to do. We need to hear as we go through these lessons, as we study the Bible. We need to be prepared to listen. If we just sit here and we don't hear a word and it just sort of goes in one ear and out the other and we don't apply it, if we forget who we are when we go to the post office and get mad because we stand in line too long, or if you're driving back and forth, I'm seeing a lot more of that lately. People losing their minds driving back and forth into Nashville and out. So we need to be thinking about this stuff all the time. And if we sat here and we came up with this same lesson every week, week in and week out, and we came up here and talked about this every Wednesday and Sunday, twice on Sunday, this exact same thing, and we had 1,000 people in here, and we just hammered this message, there would still be somebody that would think, well, I know better. A decision would come up eventually, and they would say, I know better. I know better than what I've learned here. I can do this on my own. I can make this decision without involving the Lord. I don't have to pray on this. I can just, I've been successful at whatever I've been doing, and I'll just stay the course. And that's the time that we get in trouble. That's the time we need to be thinking about it. Sometimes when you want something bad enough, it just sort of becomes an obsession. It becomes all you can think about, all you can see in your mind. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's this big fancy house that you maybe can afford, but maybe you can't. And you dive into that and you kind of go off in the wrong direction, and then things just pile up. And we need to consider that when we make those decisions. There's this idea that there's a period of indecision sometimes when we kind of don't know what we want to do, so we let the world sneak in and we just finally give in. And we say, well, I'll just go ahead and do so and so. That's the easiest thing to do. I'll just make that easy decision. In 1 Kings 18, in Elijah's time, we've got a good description of that. In verse 18, Ahab tells Elijah, you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, followed the Baals. So Elijah gathers everyone around and says in verse 21, how long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. And I really like that. How long will you falter between two opinions? If we get just stuck in indecision and we start just going with the flow, the flow can take us in a terrible direction if we're not thinking about what we need to really do. I think of the biggest lesson from all of this, and the thing I think about is sometimes we just have to decide against the thing that we may actually want. We may have to decide to go in a different direction and pick something that, maybe this isn't exactly what I want, but this is what's best. And I see some people make decisions, they kind of go in a different direction. This is exactly what I want, and I'm going to take it, and it is what it is. And if I can't come to church on Sundays anymore because I got to work every single Sunday, and that's what I'll do to make my $900 a month car payment. stuff like that. And I think you see more and more of that. You see more and more where faith comes, doesn't win anymore. It's the things that I want this right now. And you'll sacrifice what's really important to get it. And we need to be careful with that. We need to watch the people around us that we care about, try to prevent them from doing things like that also. It'd be great if all of our choices were just obvious. If you sit here and you could say, I'm going to pray on it, I'm going to talk to my brothers and sisters in Christ, I'm going to talk to people I trust, and I'm going to listen. And you could just make a cut and dry decision, and you didn't falter in between, and you could just live your life on the right path. And we have that available to us. And it's all through the Bible. It explains it to us. Back in James 1 and verse 12, we're told, blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. And that's the ultimate reward, and that's our goal. That's where we're hopefully heading. If we're doing the right thing and we're making the right decisions, and sometimes it takes a little bit of sacrifice in this world to stay on the right path. But that's okay. All these material things we're going to leave behind at some point. And then somebody else is going to have them or have to deal with them. So those things aren't that important. We need to think about what is really important and who's really important and where we want to end when this short life is over. And it is fleeting. It is fleeting. As we come up on that 30 years, I think, where did 30 years go? 30 years, it seems like it's a big number. When I passed 50, I was like, wow, 50 is such a big number. Now I can barely remember turning 50 now. Wasn't that long ago, but it's just everything becomes a memory. It's gone. You're just flying forward. So we need to think about that passage of time and staying on the right path. So that's just something I was thinking about this week or week before last when I wrote this. Decisions and how they impact us and how they can, set us on a trail we may not want to be on. And I'll say one more thing about decisions. Sometimes when we get so far down the path, it's really hard to get back on the right path. And you see these big boats, they, try to turn around in the middle of the ocean. It's a lot harder than it looks. It's a lot harder to turn around in life than it looks too. So if they can't stop on a dime, we certainly can't either. So we have to think about that too. If you are subject to the invitation tonight, now's the time that we ask you to come forward. If you need the prayers of the church, your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, if you have need, you don't want to put it off. You don't want to make that decision to wait. You want to take action while you can. And we're here for you to do that while we stand and sing this final song.